Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And this one is a very long time in coming. I've had this on my list since March. It is almost August, but it is also 2020, the year where everything is weird and everything is going wrong, so I'm just happy I got to it. So today I am reviewing Crown of the Sundered Empire by JC Kang. This is a not direct sequel, but in the same world as Masters of Deception by the same author. And I read it wrong. I somehow got it into my head in the interim between requesting or accepting the request and reviewing it that it was a prequel. And I'm not sure why. I even went back and looked at the message that the author sent me when I got the book, and he said, it's not a direct sequel, but it does take place after. And apparently my brain stopped at it's not a direct sequel. So I confused myself a lot in that I expected it to be taking place before Masters of Deception, and I don't know why. But anyway, I also decided to read this book in 4 days. This highly dense ton of lore and world building high fantasy that is 600 pages or just shy thereof in 4 days. I did myself no favors. So it got a little bit confusing. But basically, this book takes place after Masters of Deception, involving one of the protagonists from there, and a side character from that book that was basically a throwaway in the first becomes a bigger character in this one, which I did appreciate. Aaron did not get a lot of love in the first one. But regardless, GA is still searching for the Black Clan traitor and ends up getting caught into a lot of political machinations in this Sundered Empire. This empire was made up of one group of people who considered themselves the best, and they ended up having a civil war because one side wanted to intermingle, aka have babies with other cultures, the other side did not, and they split. And then the side that wanted to intermingle with other cultures split again, so now you have 3 different countries of what was one once this solid empire. And the crown prince of one of these countries decides that he is going to bring all these 3 countries together again, kicking and screaming, by marrying 2 different princes to 2 different princesses from the various countries to bring them together. So that was the gist of it. But there's also another invading force, there's also some people from other cultures involved, and the actual intermingling of all the characters, of which there are a lot, got a little unwieldy. Whereas in the first one, it was more like here's your Aksumi Paladin, or Aksumi Mystic who will explain Aksumi Mystic, here's the Paladin who will explain Paladins. This one was, you had a princess who was born in one country, but was then adopted into another country, but she still has a brother there that she still has a connection with. There's a lot of intermingling and a lot of bad blood behind different, factions, and then, of course, you have this entirely other side story, which is a little bit strange to me. The character of Tomas, who is the featured character in the synopsis, he's only one of many, and it's actually kind of confusing at first to figure out how his side story fits in with the larger world, because he's dealing with this incursion of Bovians or Bavians. I'm not exactly sure which. Those fantasy names are always a bit tricky. They are essentially the fantasy versions of the Mongol hordes or the Mongol Empire, and they are looking for their MacGuffin. There's multiple MacGuffins here. They want this fertility water that can magically make you more fertile and produce a large amount of twins in this little island population. And quick content warnings for this: their practices, which were kind of gone over a little bit before in the first book, are a lot more focused on here, and that is the forced sexual assaults. The Bavians cannot produce female offspring, so they basically subjugate all of the women in the lands they conquer to become breeders, essentially. They each have to produce one son for the empire, and it's a much bigger threat here. You don't see anything explicit, but it is there. There is also, while I'm talking about content warnings, a content warning for suicide ideation, one of our princes who has an arranged marriage has known that it's been coming for a while, but he is gay, he has a gay lover, and he knows that they can never be together, so he's taken it upon himself that he is just going to purposely put himself in harm's way during battle to die in battle and avoid having to marry someone else and be without Dameron. And I love Dameron. It's not suicide ideation as we often depict it, but it is something to be aware of. Now, this, again, was a little bit tricky for me. I mentioned before that there were multiple MacGuffins. Beyond the magical fertility water, there was also an ancient crown, the crown of the title, that was really on the surface, the reason everyone wanted it was like, oh, to appear more legitimate on the throne, which for me, I mean, it's not a horrible reason, but it's not the most convincing as like this is why everyone is fighting to get this thing just to look like they deserve the throne more. There's also this magical ball of light, the Light of Solaris, that is very important to this once cohesive people group that, you know, everyone wants to grab because it's supposed to have all these magical powers, but does it? We're not sure. So that one made a little bit more sense, but again, a lot of MacGuffins, a lot of plot points. I really appreciated how Shakespearean and melodramatic a lot of it got with the arranged marriages. Like I said before, you have two princesses and they are both arranged to marry two princes from the various countries. Basically, it's meant to like cement two separate unions to bring the two countries back to the main one. And no one wants it. Everyone has their own secret lovers. No one wants these arranged marriages. And so there ends up being a lot of like secret meetings and pining and like a lot of cross-dressing, a lot of like princess just disguising herself as a cabin boy and a prince ending up having to disguise himself as a prostitute and a big burly assassin that somehow ends up in a dress. I wanted someone to like bite their thumb at someone else. I really wanted that. But that was probably my favorite part of all of it, was how melodramatic that got with that. And again, Tomas's side story it did connect. It was important to a certain extent, but it was not as readily apparent as why it was important. So you'd have all of these other interconnected stories, and then Tomas. Like, Tomas never actually interacted with any of the other point of view characters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It offers a wider variety, but it took a while for me to understand exactly what his plot's place was in the greater plot. I did like the demon eye. I like that he gives it a name. I'm not sure what the name is because the review copy I got was an uncorrected arc. So at certain times he called it Sabine and other times Sabina. So I'm not sure which is the name, but I love the mechanics of the magic and that he basically had like, it was almost like sci-fi in scope, that he could like triangulate his slingshot using the demon eye. It was a great way to bring in some of those like sci-fi type mechanics into a fantasy story. But if I'm talking about the best part of the book is 100% the characters. Now, the character of Tomas, I could take or leave because his plot and his character was so stereotypical high fantasy. He was the young fisherman that was, you know, this underdog, and he ends up getting thrust into the spotlight and must save the sweet, kind-hearted girl from the village, or I guess from the town. It was so stereotypical, and as someone who really only likes her high fantasy as diverse or gay or, you know, from a group of color, I didn't really care for his. Although, again, it is a group of color. Now, I don't know the one-on-one. I can kind of gauge that, like, yes, the Bavians are supposed to be the Mongols and, like, the Paladins from the first book. I'm pretty sure those are supposed to be, like, the stand-in for India. You can kind of see the different Asian cultures that play into this. It is own voices. And I was kind of bored with Tomas. I much preferred all of the other characters involved in the arranged marriages. GA is, of course, still there, but again, she felt a little bit more like a side character, like she was really just there to connect it, or to be the connection between Aaron. Aaron got a bigger role and a lot more love. He's still like kind of the ditzy romantic sap prince, but he gets a little bit more depth here. He's a little bit more savvy than people give him credit for. My favorite was the relationship between Princess Elena, our adopted princess, and Aylward, who is Aaron's illegitimate brother, and she is the standard redhead, exceedingly confident, knows she's sexy and knows she's strong. And Aylward is this, when he's on his ship, he's a fearsome Navy lieutenant and he knows what he's about and he's brilliant. And then he steps on land and he's got the grace of a baby giraffe. And I loved it. And I love how, like, Elena can't, like, she can't figure him out because he's sexy and daring on a ship, but then, like, adorkable on land. And I loved that dynamic. There is one of the princesses, Karina, I believe, who is just kind of there. She wasn't a point of view character. She didn't have much about her. Everyone said she's a soft, malleable, demure princess. Oh, like, whatever. But the other characters of, like, Corin, the dashing gay prince that would rather die in battle than be without his lover, and it was very, very dynamic in characters, which is why I almost didn't mind that I couldn't understand the plot half the time. I didn't remember what MacGuffin they were going for at that moment or how it all went together, but I liked the characters. So I'm like, I don't know what y'all are doing, but I'm good to follow. I don't need to know. I'll just follow. It's fine. And I believe this is the beginning of a separate series, so this will be more following this Sundered Empire. And of course, they share an enemy with our characters from the first book, the Teleri and the Altivorks. Still not the biggest fan that orcs are, once again, the universal bad guys and brutish. But because it is such a regular high fantasy trope, I can't really fault this book for it specifically. At this point, I'm just at the rate where if a book doesn't have that, I give it bonus points. But regardless, I definitely appreciated this book. This is definitely a book where you need to like this kind of book. Not a good pick if you're new to high fantasy at all. Definitely dense world building. Definitely a lot of names that sound similar. And that's not just my stupid white brain. They actually make jokes in the book that the Kingdom of Corinth has a ton of similar names. Like, the name is Corinth. Their prince is Corinne. The princess is Karina. Like, all spelled similarly. So it gets a little bit confusing. But beyond that, if you're willing to take it slower than I did and keep note of where it actually is in the universe instead of assuming wrongly for some stupid reason, you will probably love this book. I gave it 4 stars, even with all the confusion, because I can't figure out if I want to be or be with Elena, but I loved it anyways, and I think you might as well. If you are an indie author and you're looking for a review like this one, please send me an email. I will have my email down in the description below. I will also have my review policy down there, so please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions. Keep in mind that I am currently soft closed to review requests, which means I am much more likely to say no than usual, and I am hoping eventually to get more broadly open again in the near future. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.